Dumb Spiro, Spero got world while I breathe. I hope Dumb Spiro, Spero got world.
You can listen to a music version of this podcast at Dumb Spiro Sparrow World. Check out the store at dumbspirosparrow.world. Haile Selassie, Emperor Everlasting of Ethiopia. Haile Selassie, also known as Rastafari, is perhaps the best-known inspirational icon to hail from the northeasterly country of Ethiopia, which is easily found on a world atlas, as the country sits within the Horn of Africa. And although this famous political figure is no longer here on planet Earth in bodily form, Haile Selassie still lives on in the halls of political and iconic fame. Early years and stately promotions befitting of an emperor in the making. Born into Ethiopian royalty, his name at birth was Tafari Makanon Walda Michael, and he made his entrance into the world on the 23rd of July 1892, which made him a Saturday's child, works hard for a living, and a Leo by horoscope star sign. It is widely believed by many in Ethiopia and the world at large that Tafari may have even been a descendant of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, who reigned in their respective kingdoms at round about the 10th century before Christ. Due to his royal heritage, Tafari was schooled privately and excelled at his studies, which caused him to fall under the favourable radar of Emperor Menelik II, and thus, at the very young age of just 13 years, Tafari received the highly esteemed military commander vanguard title of Tijasmark, and a year later he was appointed as governor to Salal, and he soon too became the governor for the southern Ethiopian region of Sidamo, and in 1911 he also governed over Harar, and in the same year married Menen Asfor, who came from an influential Ethiopian family. From commander to emperor. In 1913, Tafari, who was by then known as Rastafari, led an opposition Christian party in a successful attempt to overthrow the very unpopular king and emperor of Ethiopia, Lige Yasso, and so hence on Sunday the 11th of February 1917, Yasso's much more likeable daughter, Zarditi, was crowned and so became the Empress of Ethiopia. She appointed Rastafari as the acting ruler and also made him heir to the throne, which meant that Rastafari's authority and power was second only to Empress Zarditi's, and in some ways their dual authority of the governorship of Ethiopia complemented one another, as Empress Zarditi was deeply focused on religion, and the soon-to-become Emperor Rastafari was more interested in politics. Out with the old Africa and in with the new. After Rastafari had recovered from a very serious bout of influenza in 1918, which not only affected the African continent but also overwhelmed countries in Asia, Europe, and the Americas, and wiped out 3% of the world's population, Rastafari, a keen academic, became passionate about the development of Ethiopia and the continent of Africa in general. He recognized that in order to thrive, Africa needed to move with the times and modernize, and accordingly he pledged to put a stop to slavery in Ethiopia, and thus championed Ethiopia's new membership at the League of Nations in 1923, which in turn brought the still relatively young Rastafari a certain amount of celebrity abroad, as well as ever-increasing popularity in Ethiopia. Rastafari knew that for Ethiopia to become a more powerful player on the world stage, Ethiopia needed to export its natural mineral wealth as well as import goods. So Ethiopia obviously needed to gain legal and safe passage to the seas. Hence, a very determined Rastafari, and with his delegation in 1924, travelled to Europe and the Middle East, visiting Belgium, Britain, France, and Italy. And although none of these countries helped Ethiopia on its mission to secure an economic seaward-bound route, Rastafari and his team gained first-hand knowledge of westernized infrastructure such as factories and other enterprises, schools and hospitals, etc. Rastafari's Armenians. Notably, during his travels abroad in 1924, when Rastafari stopped off at Israel, he visited a monastery in Jerusalem and adopted 40 Armenian orphaned children and paid for their education and musicianship in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. They became the members of the Ethiopian State Imperial Brass Band, and they were affectionately referred to as the King's Kids by the Ethiopians, and there are still Armenian Ethiopians who are direct descendants of the Armenian orphans in Addis Ababa today. Ethiopia's African roots and westernized modernity. Upon his return to his homeland, Rastafari began the important and earnest task of improving Ethiopia's industries and factories. He used the European democratic model as the basis and example of advancing Ethiopia's framework for the betterment of the Ethiopian people. However, Rastafari was as equally proud to be Ethiopian as he was intensely resolute to bring Ethiopia up to date. As a result of these two ideals, Rastafari welcomed foreign enterprise, but to be vigilant against Western imperialism and globalization, while ensuring the continuation of Ethiopian economic independence, traditions, and values. All foreign industries were only able to have a partial stake in any given company or business. The other percentage and portion of the business had to be funded and co-owned by Ethiopians or the Ethiopian state. A king and emperor all in one. In 1928, Empress Zarditi appointed Rastafari as the King of Ethiopia, and after the Empress's death in 1930, Rastafari also became the Emperor of Ethiopia, and this was when Tafari, aka Rastafari, officially became known as Haile Selassie. With haste and expediency, he continued the pursuit of bringing positive and advantageous reform to Ethiopia by building new schools and encouraging new enterprises to do business. He also enlarged Ethiopia's police forces and military, which in part was probably due to an increasing uneasiness of right-wing politics in Europe. The Ethiopian emperor and the Italian dictator. In 1935, the power-mad Benito Mussolini sought to avenge Italy's defeat during the Italia-Abyssinia War. Abyssinia was a term for the Ethiopian Empire. In 1895, Italy, the then invader, underestimated Ethiopia's defences and alliance with Russia, and so Italy was overwhelmed and retreated like a naughty little puppy with its tail between its legs and head hung low. The puffed up with pride, haughty Mussolini was seemingly tormented by this historical military thrashing, and so clutching at the coattails of his friend and ally Adolf Hitler, he sent his army to invade Ethiopia. After all, if Hitler could get away with expanding the German Empire, copycat Mussolini thought he could enlarge the Italian Empire. Return of the exiled king. Mussolini's fascist army was initially more prepared and stronger than Haile Selassie's Ethiopian army, but after about 1 month, Haile Selassie's army forced back the invading Italian army. However, the victory was only temporary, and within a matter of a couple of months, the invaders had once again gained a stronghold. As a consequence, Haile Selassie and his family went into exile, leaving Ethiopia for England. He spent much time gaining political support at the League of Nations and other important political establishments to free his homeland from the clutches of Mussolini. Interestingly, imperialist Britain actually proved to be a firm ally of Ethiopia, and in 1941 the British joined the Ethiopians in driving out the fascist invaders once and for all, and on Saturday, the 18th of January of the same year, Haile Selassie, his army, and the British forces crossed the border from the Sudan into Ethiopia. Rastafari was home once more. Voting rights for the Ethiopian people. After the Second World War had ended, and throughout the 1950s, Haile Selassie continued to make improvements to Ethiopia's infrastructure by strengthening the Ethiopian army and improving the education system, and boosting the Ethiopian economy by encouraging enterprise initiatives, and he also tried to enhance cordiality between various minority, ethnic, and religious groups. He also restructured the Ethiopian parliamentary system, whereby he made a lower electable parliament so the Ethiopian people would have representation and a political voice, so to speak. The Emperor and a USOA. In the 1960s, various countries within the continent of Africa set up the OAU, which stands for the Organization of African Unity, now known as the African Union, which was affiliated to the cause of a unified Africa, and due to Haile Selassie's political popularity abroad and Ethiopia's good standing with Europe, Addis Ababa was chosen as the OAU's headquarters. Haile Selassie, a keen proponent of the OAU, went one step further and called for the formation of a United States of Africa, a concept which many African peoples still hold as a high hope and ideal today. Haile Selassie, longest-serving head of state of his time. During the winter years of his life in the 1970s, Haile Selassie had become the longest living head of state in the world. This afforded him high prestige, and so he made many state visits to countries outside of Africa in order to try and further Ethiopia as well as the state of Africa as a whole, and he was warmly received by host nations, often taking pride of place and elevated status over and above other world leaders at the metaphorical table of the political pecking order. famine and abdication. In 1973, a famine took hold in the Wollo region in north-eastern Ethiopia. It wrought terrible hunger, cruel emaciation, and lingering death upon at least 40,000 Ethiopian people. Haile Selassie was blamed for the debilitatingly high number of human and animal losses, and so was forced to let go of the reins of power and step down. Although some say that Haile Selassie was ousted out of office by coup de force. Nevertheless, whatever the exact circumstances were, Haile Selassie's political and kingly reign over Ethiopia came to an end on the inauspicious date of Friday the 13th of September 1974. The Emperor with an unmarked grave. Haile Selassie breathed his last breath on Wednesday the 27th of August 1975. The official explanation for his death is that he died of complications during an operation. However, the doctor who operated on him refuted this explanation, and many Ethiopians believe that Haile Selassie was covertly medically eliminated or assassinated, and the fact that the burial site of Haile Selassie, the most famous of all Ethiopian kings and emperors, is still unknown even up to this present day, only further fuels assassination theories. 25 years later, on Sunday, the 5th of November 2000, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church gave Haile Selassie, the sleeping emperor, a funeral fit for a king. Haile Selassie and the Rastafari religion. Haile Selassie, whose former name when he entered the political arena before he became king and emperor of Ethiopia, was Rastafari. Ras means prince in Ethiopia, and Tafari means one who is respected and feared. Just as Christians believe that Jesus Christ, as part of the Trinity, is God incarnate, Rastafaris similarly believe that Haile Selassie, aka Rastafari, who is considered to be a descendant of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, is the physical embodiment of God. The central tenets of the Rastafari religious school of thought is mostly based on Haile Selassie's religious, social, and political persuasions. Rastafari observers are steadfast that their inspirational icon, Haile Selassie, is the African Messiah who will lead African peoples everywhere to total freedom and emancipation. Rastafaris also refer to Haile Selassie as the elect of God and also the conquering lion of the tribe of Judah, and due to his presumed biblical royal heritage, he is also called the King of Kings of Ethiopia.